Hi guys. So we're from Singapore, a city a little bit like Bangkok, maybe in very different ways. So I'll share with you today about urban farming, urban agriculture, and a story about Singapore. Singapore is a very small country, 719 square kilometers with 5.6 million people. So a lot of people live in these kind of high-rise building. In the past, Singapore used to be a largely agriculture nation. We were actually growing so much pork that we were exporting pork in the 1975. But at that point of time, we were a population of 1.6 million people. So what happened? Today, 90% of our food is imported. 1% of our land is under cultivation. So that is about 700 hectares. And because as Singapore progressed economically, the pursuit of financial districts and that kind of stuff pushed farms away. And farming was relegated to less importance in terms of GDP contribution. And what has the government done? I think food security is a big problem in Singapore with 90% of our food imported. So what we do is we diversify our import from 170 countries so that if Malaysia doesn't sell us food, maybe Thailand will still sell us some rice. But this has repercussions with so much kind of reliance left on other countries to produce food for a highly dense city. This is Cameron Highlands, just about an hour and a half drive from Singapore, up in the mountains. They produce 200 tons of vegetables, and that comes to Singapore every day. But look at that. It's a sea of plastic. It's not a sustainable way of agriculture. And you would think, why do you have neat greenhouses or plastic greenhouses in a tropical environment, right? That beats me as well. And our government continues to look at ways to increase our food production, not in Singapore alone, but overseas. And this is one of the projects that they're working on, a super farm in China with 1,450 square kilometers. Factory farms, pig farms, processing plant. And I think this is not where agriculture should go into mass industrialized farming systems. So what we have done in the last 5 years was to go back into the city and to look at unutilized space. A lot of people tell me there's no space in Singapore to grow food, right? Because we're so landlocked. But we found space. We found space on the rooftops. This is at a school. This is right in the middle of a shopping district in Singapore, Orchard Road. And we use very traditional organic methods of growing. Again, in many times, trying different techniques. We went down a lot of times the wrong route, trying to grow things that are not suited for the local environment, like rockets, lettuces. And it was challenging. And the different techniques we found, we actually nailed one down using a very permaculture technique of food foresting. We actually found that you create a very diverse, multi-layered garden on the rooftops. And the diversity that we found within the last 5 years was that there's so much in the tropics to give. You have trees like the Sesabenia grandiflora, which is a nitrogen-fixing tree, interesting fruits like the belimbing, the kadongdongs, all funny names, and even cherries, Suriname cherries at the bottom, which is native to Suriname. And it goes on. The second layer really adds complexity into then different types of flavor profiles. One of those that I've always loved is the Ulam Raja, which is on the right, called the king of salads, a cosmos, has a smell of lychee. Butterfly ginger with beautiful sweet flowers as an edible flower. And it took us a lot to trial, a lot of trial and errors. The ground covers that we use, sweet potato leaves that are red in color, purslane, pinto peanuts, Mexican tarragon. So there's a lot of diversity into creating a food forest right in the middle of the city. And the climbers, I think one of the things that had a big resurgence in the last 2 to 3 years is the butterfly pea. Now it's really, really cool to use, different coloring layers. But all these are actually part of a system that we are building up because things like the butterfly pea, they fix nitrogen into the soil. So we interplant them with other crops that requires lots of nitrogen, and they provide shade and cover for then the understory plants as well. And over the last 5 years, we've worked out a compendium of different types of herbs, different types of microgreens, and today we supply to 60 restaurants in Singapore, and we're adding on to that list. And we continue to kind of develop that complexity of what is available in the tropical environment, especially in the city. But urban farming is not just about food production. I think over the last 5 years, is when you're pushing a movement, it needs to be in multiple layers and multiple trajectories. And education has always been a big part So today we have educated 40 schools, just teaching them from sowing a seed all the way to harvest. We have a retail space that encourage people to grow their own food at home. We've built about 63 of these gardens in Singapore. And we have a food production space of 9,000 square meters in the city. But other than food production, the people and the community is what we see is the most valuable aspect. Every time we build a garden, people come together. They want to find out about food growing. They want to be connected to it. And through these pop-ups and these initiatives that we've done, we also drive a different civil society movement into creating other social enterprises in the space, talking about food sustainability. For example, Food State Collective is a group of people that have come together through one of our pop-ups and started something called geo-mapping of the different growing food systems in Singapore, the community gardens. And the government has not done nothing as well. Today, the National Parks Board of Singapore runs 1,000 community gardens in Singapore. So that's 1,000 gardens in the heartlands of Singapore where people are growing food, ornamental plants, and we continue to see people coming together. I think the community aspect is very, very important. And what we found on another point is that actually plants have effect of healing people, not only physically if you eat good organic food, but also mentally. So the process of planting actually brings about horticulture therapy. It's a proven technique, and you can get a diploma in horticulture therapy. But who I want to introduce to you today is Daniel. So Daniel has autism spectrum disorder. And 2 years ago, we hired Daniel, we trained him, and he, as an autistic adult, he enjoys repetitive tasks. He finds comfort in repetitive tasks. And farming is all about repetitive tasks. And he has gotten a lot of therapeutic benefits from just growing food with us. And we continue to train and employ the marginalized communities just to provide them with a job which they won't otherwise have. And through that learnings that we had over the last 5 years, last year we started a farm right in the middle of the city on 8,000 square meters of space called Citizen Farm. And what this does is it brings together very different ideologies of how we see the future of urban farms. I think as urban farms, we have responsibility outside of just food production, and we should also look at elevating some of the social causes in the city itself. What really ties the farm together is the closed-loop method that we employ, taking food waste, turning that into fertility, pumping that into the system, and then supplying to the local community the food that we grow. And we're not a monocrop farm. We have diverse systems. Unfortunately, some indoor farms, some outdoor farms, mushroom farms, tomato farms, and a whole merit of different systems, all having a symbiotic relationship with each other. So these are some of the different things that we farm. But what is the theory of change that we're doing here? We are actually cutting down the carbon footprint of the food being produced, taking away the middleman because we're selling direct to the customers. And we have full transparency of our system. Anyone can walk into the farm any day to see what we're doing and can be part of that. So people come and volunteer on our farms on a regular basis. And the biggest part about what we do is tackling the food waste problem. Last year, Singapore wasted 700,000 tons of food. And we are looking at different types of food waste and looking at how we can turn that into facility to feed that back into our system. And one of the projects that we have been running for the last 3 years is to turn coffee waste into a substrate for growing mushrooms. I think we've been working with Marina Bay Sands to collect their coffee waste on a daily basis, mixing that with sawdust, inoculating that, growing that on. And after the mushroom has grown, the mycelium body is returned back onto the garden as a mulch, as an organic fertilizer. So we are cutting the waste loop in the city itself and growing food. The black soldier fly is another one that we're working on. So what this does is to reduce the food waste problem. We should be taking in 2 tons of food waste per day, turning that into high-protein grubs that is fed to the chickens and the fish, and the leachate and the compost, the castings that's produced is high-value organic fertilizer that we are looking at how we're going to reintroduce that into organic hydroponic systems, into our indoor growing operations, and also into our gardens. So we have different systems. We have container farm systems. And this is the box that we supply to also consumers in a community-supported agriculture way. Today we have 30 families on the list, and we will be expanding that to 100 by this year. But just 6 months, we have achieved so much more than just production. We've hired 15 beneficiaries, so these are adults with Down syndrome, adults with autism, created social value, not in money terms, but taking these people, giving them a job. And volunteers have come, about 500 volunteers have come into our space in just 6 months. And continue to open the farm up to people to come and look. And we try and increase the value of what the beneficiaries do. They are always seen as working on low-functioning tasks. We're getting them into the mushroom clean room to get them to do more high-value lab-type work of inoculation of the mushrooms. And by 2019, we will be running, hopefully, one of the biggest rooftop farms in Singapore in the civic district with about 45,000 square feet of rooftop space. But our ultimate vision is to create a system that can produce 100% of Singapore's leafy greens consumption. This is not the entire 100% of food that's farmed in Singapore, just leafy greens, because they don't travel as well, and growing them in the city makes a lot more sense. But the future of urban farming is is going on 2 tracks. Are we looking at small-scale, organic, community-driven farms, rooftop farms? Or are we looking at big money, indoor factory farms, or high-rise buildings built into farms? What we feel from having seen 2 sides of it is to have a balance, to have both. Right? You have a bit of technology, a bit of indoor farming, a bit of the social causes, a bit of food waste, composting. And we designed this system. We call it the closed-loop urban farming unit, stacked 6 containers. To give you a quick summary of it, is you put food waste at the mouth at the top, and it shits out food. Basically, yeah. But what it does is actually a symbiotic arrangement where the mushrooms, they produce CO2 that goes to the vegetables, we produce oxygen, which then the mushroom needs to go. So it's a closed-loop system in itself. And again, it's then tackling one of the bigger problems we have in Singapore. It's not that we don't have enough food. It's the amount of waste that we produce yearly, and turning that waste into something that we can use in the city. There's only going to be that many landfills we have in Singapore, and they're all filling up pretty fast. And we want to take this idea, we want to scale it into every part of Singapore. We did a test project under the viaducts, which is just flyover, putting mushrooms and microgreens and vegetables in it. If you look at the sums, we've done the figures, we need 6,000 of these closed-loop farming units to get Singapore to produce 100% of all leafy greens production in Singapore. And the value that we'll be creating is 80,000 tons of leafy greens a year, reducing 26% of food waste in Singapore, and creating 11,500 jobs for people with autism, people with Down syndrome, and ex-prisoners. And it can't be done without just me alone. We have a big, very diverse team coming from all walks of life. You have ex-cons that through the Yellow Ribbon Project, you have adults with Down syndrome, adults with autism. And I just want to end my talk with this quote by Masanobu Fukuoka: the ultimate goal of farming is not the growing of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings. And I think urban farming is the epitome of that, because we are cultivating people and not cultivating just crops. So thank you very much for your time.